is the thought of imagination, which is where everything starts from, the content that that imagination creates, and then the context that we see that in, and the shift that we're now seeing. So I want you to use your imagination and think back to late 1970s, a house party. Led Zeppelin, Stairway to Heaven being played for the 15th time. All my friends completely out of their minds. Me sneaking on U2's I Will Follow. Them looking at me going, what are you doing? It's crap. This band will never get anywhere. It's about Led Zeppelin. So that was the use of imagination, the content, and the context. The context is the funny part. But the great thing is whenever I think of Stairway to Heaven, I'm taken back to that time. That is a bookmark within inside my life created by an emotional attachment to music. And when you begin to think about that, you begin to think about what is music. It's not a copyright, which annoys most of the people within the music business, which I'm in. So I tend to annoy them a lot by saying music is not a copyright. It is not a lyric. It is not a melody. A song is an emotion. And when we relate to that emotion and we put our own thoughts upon that emotion, we co-collaborate with that artist, and that song becomes a bookmark within inside our lives. And that's why we have the current situation within inside the music business where the music business thinks they own these songs. The fans think that they own them because it's their emotions that they've attached to that song. You can have a song that sells 1 million copies with a million different emotional connections. And that is why we're in this situation within inside the music business, which has been in recession for 10 years. Nice of the rest of the world to join us last year. Just to let you know, we will be out of recession in about 18 months. You're more than welcome to join us quicker. So think about that, and to think about imagination. Because imagination for me has been a very dominant thing within inside my life. And it was really brought to bear when my daughter was able to communicate to me and start to ask me all of these amazing questions, usually starting with 3 letters, W-H-Y. Everything was why, why, why. And it made me start to think, yes, why? And it started to give me back some of my imagination too that I'd used early in my career as an entrepreneur. And very simply, 25 years ago, I imagined releasing music that I loved. Because back then, the radio was dominated by Bryan Adams, which it still is, Anne Murray, which I don't think it no longer is, and a lot of music that was good, but it wasn't my taste. It just wasn't what I was into. So simply imagined releasing music that I loved. And the great thing is about imagination and the power of imagination is if you can imagine it, you know what it looks like. You don't need to dream it. You know what it looks like. If anything, the journey is backwards. It's not forwards. And that's a great thing. So imagine, let's say, an all-female concert tour. Everybody told me it was nuts. It was never going to happen. Could never happen. You couldn't even put 2 female artists together, back to back. It wouldn't happen. Wouldn't sell a ticket. Well, we ended up putting 11 female artists together on something called Lilith Fair. And from 1997 to 1999 was the biggest, largest traveling music festival in the world. All we did was take context and throw a different content on it. And it was just a different way of traveling it around. We hear a lot of discussion about content is king. Well, we have to have content, granted, but content comes from your imaginations. But it's the context that is now king. I mean, think of what's happened within inside the music business, where over the last 10 years, through litigation, through legislation, the business has tried to change the behavior of tens of millions of teenagers. When are we ever going to learn we cannot change the opinion of teenagers? We keep trying it generation after generation. And you'd think that we would learn from history. You cannot litigate behavior, and you cannot legislate behavior. What you can do is listen to it, and listen well, and understand behaviors. And if the music business could accept the fact that a song is an emotion, then they'd understand that the monetization of that emotion is the business. It's not about selling records. I mean, artists create songs. It was accountants that thought if I put two songs together as an A side and a B side and I make a single, I can sell it for the price of 3. And then as the technology got better and you could put 8 songs on a piece of vinyl, for those that know what vinyl is, I could sell those 8 songs at the price of 12 songs. The album concept was not created by artists. It was created by lawyers and accountants. Artists then took that, as they always do, and made it their own. They changed the context of it. They started creating concept albums, which is your Pink Floyds, and all of those bands created a whole other way of looking at albums. And then graphic artists got in there and the packaging and all the liner notes. Then along comes a technology called MPEG-3. And I can remember 10 years ago being at music conferences and saying, you know what, this is about to change. And having lawyers going, there's no way that a song can travel down a phone line and end up at the other side. It'll take hours. And I'm like, it's not going to take hours. I said, it might take a few minutes right now, but pretty soon it's going to take a few seconds. I said, and you've got a really big problem because when you released the CDs, you didn't protect any of those digital files. It's all out there. But what a great thing. It's all out there. As such, you spread the ability of the community to take the content and put their context on it and change behaviors. Funny enough, the introduction of the CD was the beginning of the end of the music business control. Because they controlled the distribution, they controlled how you heard it. It was very much a push philosophy. What the CD did was change it. Now you could pull. If anyone has kids, especially between the ages of 3 and 7, you understand the concept of a CD getting pulled. You're driving down the road, a song comes on, and your daughter says, again. So you play it again. And about the 3rd time, you're not really willing to play it again. But if you don't, there's a meltdown happening in the back seat. So you keep playing it. That wasn't possible with vinyl unless you're willing to scratch. Cassette tapes, made it a little bit easier. The 8-track would have worked great, but that format lost out. So literally the CD's introduction in the early 80s was a change in behavior. Their problem wasn't that they didn't lock down the files. The thing is that they were changing behavior. We began to take the millennium generation and take it from a push to their ability to pull. And at the age of 3, from 3 to about 9, those habits become habits that you have for the rest of your life. And if anything, there's a whole business around changing those habits. So we have a situation where the business created a pull, and it created the behavioral shift. So along came the downloads, along came the peer-to-peer file sharing, along came the lawsuits, along came the litigation, along came the fear. Versus looking at the opportunity, versus using your imagination to understand that more music was being consumed everywhere. Yet about 5% of it within the digital space was actually being monetized. Why? Because they were wanting to control it. You cannot control a teenager, I keep saying that. So about 3-4 years ago, I started talking about the concepts of digital maids or digital valets. Because we had to add value. We had to understand behavior and the context, not the content, because content, in my mind, was no longer king. So what happens if we made it really easy to not own music? Actually make it a negative to own music. I mean, think of all of those files that have been downloaded, hundreds of millions, maybe even billions by now. It's a clutter. You've got a bunch of junk sitting on your desktop. You've got a bunch of junk sitting on your iPod. I mean, the days of the iPod, funny enough, are actually over. The iPod's over. Apple knew that. They created something new. It's called an iPhone. And an iPhone is about behavior. It's not about owning content. It's about behavior. And then when they opened up that app store to allow everybody else to put their ideas in, that's when it really took off. I mean, 18 months ago, that business didn't exist. Now they're doing 6.6 million downloads of applications a day from zero. But all they've done is crowdsource the imagination of the world. So let's crowdsource the imagination of that world to save the music business, because being in recession for 10 years is a little bit tough. It's been tough on me, frankly. I've had to travel a lot more to get anything done. So imagine if we create these digital valets. Imagine there's a situation where I don't want to own music. Actually, all that music that I've illegally downloaded. And actually, I haven't illegally downloaded anything. But what I have done is broken the copyright law. I broke it when I was a teenager making mixed cassettes to give to girls to show my musical taste, because I couldn't talk to them. So this was my way of saying, this is who I am. And if you like the music, maybe you want to go on a date with me. It's no different. Every generation has that emotional connection to music. So I've broken the copyright law. I'm willing to bet that everybody in the music business who's suing all of those kids has also broken the copyright law. So it's kind of ironic. So think about the situation where we now put all that music up in those clouds. We don't need to own it. We put it where all of our text messages are and where all of our emails are. Store it up there. We don't really need it. What we need is instant access to it. On almost any smartphone device now, there's enough memory within inside your RAM for about 300 songs. Well, 300 songs is a couple of days' worth of music. It really is. Now, what happens if your library wasn't the 100,000 tracks that you illegally downloaded, but in fact, it's millions of tracks that you just have access to? And it's really easy to get access to. You can say, okay, I'm having a party on Friday night. We're going to have an 80s theme. I want the top 10 songs from 1980 through 89. Zip down to whatever device it is, comes those 90 to 100 songs. There's your playlist done. How long would it take you going on your laptop with all your ripped off files to create the same thing? Time. And time is money. And time's of value to everybody these days. So think about that. If these type of digital valets and these type of digital maids, and even a maid to go into the digital locker of a teenager, which is going to be a disaster. It's no different than what their physical bedrooms are. It's going to be a disaster. I mean, mine's a disaster, and I'm not a teenager. I've got a lot of junk sitting on my laptop. Probably I might access 2% of that junk on a regular basis. The other 98% just sits there because I have in my heart this need to own. Well, these digital valets and these digital apps are finally beginning to come. Now, they haven't really come to North America yet. I think the closest thing we have in North America would be probably Slacker or Pandora or Last.fm. But with inside Europe, and you're probably hearing a little bit of talk about it, is something called Spotify. Spotify does exactly what I was saying. It has those millions of songs sitting up in the clouds. It has the ability for you to pull to any device and sync to any other device, whatever you want. So you don't need to own songs. So if you're going to go to the AC/DC concert tomorrow night and you want to hear nothing but AC/DC, you can ask it to pull down nothing but AC/DC. You'll get the studio, you'll get the live, you'll get the rarities, you'll get all that stuff. And if the following day you want nothing but, Madonna, then it'll throw all the AC/DC off and throw all the Madonna on. It's really easy. So all those files that you downloaded are absolutely useless. So Spotify started off in Sweden, which kind of makes sense because it's also where Pirate Bay was. So the thought of, sharing music was obviously, logical to them there. The need not to pay was also logical. So, but what happened was that the minute that Spotify began to catch on, peer-to-peer file sharing started to go down. And I believe in August of this year, the income to the major labels from Spotify was more than what it was from iTunes. Huge behavioral shift. Spotify entered the UK marketplace, I think, about less than a year ago. They have signed up over 4 million people. So 10% of the population almost has been signed up. Peer-to-peer file sharing in England is dropping at a fast rate, a really fast rate. Here in North America, it's still slightly going up. Spotify is trying to get into this marketplace, but of course the publishers, the record labels, the songwriters are all, of course, what they've been doing really well for the last 50 years, arguing with each other and not being able to understand that this is coming whether they like it or not, and that it would be better to be part of something that gives the music fan what they want versus trying to stop the music fan from getting what they want. Because ultimately, those music fans will get what they want anyways. It's their behavior, it's what they do. So when Spotify comes here, and I'm going to guess it probably next year, and there will be other digital valets of like similar nature that will also come on board. We will see a shift in the consumption of music, and it will go away from content, and it'll go towards context. And as such, the music business is within a year to 18 months away from actually probably coming out of its depression, all the negativity, and actually rising up. And what I love about that is that it brings that connection of the artist and fan back together again. Because it hasn't been a really good one over the last 10 years. You know, you've even had certain artists like Metallica suing fans. Metallica was built on fans. Metallica should have looked at what the Grateful Dead did. They allowed people to record the live concerts. They allowed them to share them and trade them. And all they did was pick the best ones that the fans did, created a compilation every 2 years, and sold it to everyone else. It was a great business model. They had no recording costs. They had an editing and mastering cost, and it was a great business. But what they did is they understood that live was the real genesis of it. And I will end this conversation by talking about Lilith Fair 2010 and the thought of consciousness and the thought of imagination. Imagine a situation where a festival creates a venture capital fund. The fans contribute not only to local charities and national charities, but to conscious for-profit companies that then, over time, through their profits, support nonprofits. I want to plant that seed, because that's the world that we live in. It's all interdependent. It's all based on context, and it's all based on imagination. On imagination, I'm imagining a nice sunny day in Vancouver tomorrow because I have my kids. Thank you.